Alright, so in this video we're going to walk through a couple of different examples that would involve conditional statements. And I'm not going to lie to you, it was actually pretty hard to find any sort of meaningful questions that just involve conditionals. Most of the time these control statements are sort of lumped together where you have your conditionals and your loops, and I didn't want to give you both of those in the same week because it can be a little bit to wrap your head around. So a lot of the better problems, the more interesting ones, are going to be on your assignment, but we can still go through some of these simpler ones, and hopefully they'll help you to get the idea of what's going on. So let me copy a problem here, and we'll paste it into our Dr. Java, and let's see what we're dealing with. So this one actually will look pretty similar to the first question on your assignment. So let's make ourselves a nice little doc string at the top. And the question. Alright, so we want to write a program that determines if a given number is a multiple of 5. And we're going to assume that we're going to be entering this number in as input. We're not just going to hard code it in. So let's just get started. And we're going to put in the author's name. So that's me, Mr. Stallnaker. The date. It's always good to date your work. And this could be for a variety of reasons. One that comes to mind, I've been talking with my web development class about copyright and issues like that. And by dating your work, you can sort of show, hey, this was mine, I was using it before someone else. I don't know if someone were to take it or steal it or something. Version control can also be good for that. But it's always helpful to have a date. And then the file name. We'll just call it file. And what's a good name for this? I'll tell you, one of the hardest parts about computer science is genuinely naming things. Let's see, let's just call it multiple of 5.java. Okay. Click on save. We'll go ahead and save it in this conditionals folder because it is about conditionals, so that makes sense. Multiple of 5. And there we go. It's in both places. That's good. It matches. Now let's do this. Class multiple of 5. Okay. I had a couple of students ask during yesterday's class what the difference between public class and class was. And that was a very good question, and I'll go over that briefly right now. So the short answer is there really isn't a difference. So when you make this thing public, you're saying that everyone, if you had multiple files, everyone is able to see what's in this class. They can make one of them, they can play with it, they can do whatever. So that's what public means. It means exactly what you would think it would. It means it's public. So by default, if you don't tell it what the visibility on it is, because public is a type of visibility, then it's going to be public. Java's going to assume that if you didn't say that you wanted to keep it to yourself, that means everyone should be able to see it. So these two things are equivalent because that's the default. Now there's another option, and don't worry about this for a while, but it exists, called private. And as I'm sure you can guess, private means you want to keep it to yourself. So public, you want to share. Private, that's just for me. It's just for this class. No one can look at it. Alright, so we're just going to leave it at class, and we're going to move on. So remember our main method? Well, look at that. It starts with public. That means that everyone can see it. Public, static, void, main, string, brackets, args. Yeah, believe it or not, every single part of this line has a meaning. And now you know what at least one of them means. Alright. So let's actually get back to the problem at hand. So we want to write a program that can determine if a number is a multiple of 5. So that tells me that we're going to have to somehow get a number. So let's say get a number, a number from the user. We're going to have to determine if that number is a multiple of 5. And then we're going to want to output I'm just going to call it the result. And that's going to be if it is a multiple of 5, yes. If it's not, we'll say no. All right. So and I picked a multiple of 5, at least to start with, because this is something that's pretty easy to tell. If it ends in a 0 or a 5, then it's going to be a multiple of 5, at least in the base 10 system. So when you see get a number from the user, that should, like, bells and whistles should be going off in your mind. All right, we need a scanner. And if we need a scanner, well, we got to go up here and we got to import it. We got to get that scanner off the shelf. We got to walk over the shelf and get the box that has the scanners in it and bring it over here so that we can play with them. So import java.util.scanner. All right, so now we've gotten that box. Now what we need to do is actually make a scanner. So we're going to take the little pieces, grab it out of the box, and then we can use it. So scanner, scan. So we're naming our scanner scan so that we can use it, equals new scanner. And then what do we want to scan? That's what we put in here. We want to scan that input stream. So the system, which is the console. So now we've got our scanner. Let's go ahead and add a comment for that too. Create the scanner. Alright, so we can use the scanner. System.out.println, just print. I always do print line, it's sort of like habit, but for these prompts, usually just print is the better option. And let's not forget our semicolon. And let's say, give me a number. We're going to be a little pushy. And the next thing that we're going to expect is going to be a number. So we're going to do int. We don't want a double. I guess you could use a double if you wanted, but we're just going to assume that this is going to be whole numbers. So given a whole number, let me just change the problem a little bit. Okay. Because I don't know, no fractional value, well, I guess like 1/5 or something, but we're just going to assume it's whole numbers. Let's say num, short for number, equals scan dot get, oh, not get, next int, sorry. I'm thinking Python. There we go. Next int. So we have our number, and you'll notice this is basically the exact same pattern that we've seen for the last 2 weeks. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and write this. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like yet, but we can fill in the print statements. So system.out.println. Let's do this. Let's print result. And we don't have a result yet, but we will. And that's where we're going to print it. So we know that the result can be one of two things. Number is a multiple of 5, or number isn't a multiple of 5. So let's take a look. That would be two choices, right? So if number is a multiple of 5. Now, how do we do a multiple of 5? Well, you might recall that if a number has no remainder when it's divided by 5, then it is divisible by 5. So 5 fits cleanly into it. There's nothing left over. So if we can check that there is no remainder when we divide by 5, we know that we have a multiple of 5. So that one more time. If we take our number and we divide it by 5, and there is no remainder, then we know our number is divisible by 5. So we can use the mod operator to do that. So number, mod, little %, 5, which gets the remainder. So whatever the remainder of the number divided by 5 is, this operator will return. If that equals, and be mindful here, the equal sign is like an assignment operator. So it's saying this thing is that. You're setting something equal to something. If you want to check if something is equal to something, you have to do equal equal. And that's exactly how you say it. So num mod 5 equal 0. And we'll put our brackets. All right. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and grab this. And I don't think we're going to have a variable called result. We'd have to do some fancy stuff with converting integers into strings. So, well, actually no, we don't. We'll do just a kind of, we'll do it the simple way. And let's put that back. Okay. Result, oops, string result equals, and what's it going to equal? The number is a multiple of 5. Let's say your number. It's a little bit more specific. Your number is a multiple of 5. And we're going to be pretty excited about that. Semicolon. Alright. And this might not compile because this is inside this if. We'll see. Yep. So you see what happened here. It says result cannot be resolved to a variable. So there it is. It's obviously there and here. So we defined it. So what's wrong? Why doesn't this work? Well, there's a thing called scope, and we'll look at this more later, but it's helpful for you to know at least a little bit about it so that you don't run into this situation like I just did. So what ends up happening is you can define the variable result inside of here too, and it only exists inside of these braces. So it's kind of like from here to here, that's one chunk of code, right? And then these braces, that's another chunk of code. Now in this case, those are the same, but they don't have to be. You could have more code in here. So, inside of these braces, if something's defined in there, it belongs to that scope is what they call it, which means that it can only be seen inside of these braces. So this is not inside of there, so it can't see it, so it's as if it doesn't exist. So how do we fix that? Well, it's pretty simple. So Java, because it's strongly typed, you can run into problems like this in Python, but it's a little bit rare. What you can do is just go up here, and I know that I have a string, and I know I want to call it result, but I don't know what I want it to be yet, so I just do that. And then I get rid of this, and I just set it equal to it. So what I'm doing here, and this is a little bit different than what's going on if you had something like string result equals, this is text. Okay. So this one is actually like an assignment. It's an initialization. You're making the variable, and you're setting it equal to something. You're doing them both at the same time. And that's all well and good. You can do that most of the time. But if you don't know at the beginning what you want it to be, this is just declaring the variable. So, initialization versus declaring. So, to declare, you're just saying, I want a thing called result. It will exist. I'll tell you what it is later. And that's really all you need to know for right now, at least. And now let's compile it and see if that fixes our problem. The local variable result may not have been initialized. Alright, so this is good too. So what does this mean? What does it mean may not have been? Well, that's perfectly good. So what the compiler is going to do, and this is one of the virtues of Java, this is something that Python won't do. Python wouldn't have crashed, it would have let us get away with this. But it runs through all the different possibilities and looks at the logic of your code and sees how it flows. So let's assume for a second that the number was 6, okay? So we entered 6, and it comes down here. So if 6 mod 5 equals 0. Well, 6 mod 5 is 1. 1 doesn't equal 0. So whatever's in here gets skipped over because this wasn't true. So we just go to the next line. Well, hold on a second. Now we need to print the result. But there is no result. It was never initialized. So that would give us an error. And that's why we're getting this down here. So what we should do, and I was sort of hoping that we could see it work beforehand, but we'll have to go ahead and make the whole thing because Java wants to make sure that we're doing this right. So you're going to have an if, then you have an else. So you know if this is true, always the number is a multiple of 5. Meaning that if this is not true, then the opposite is true. So it is not a multiple of 5. So if the remainder is 1, 2, 3, or 4, this is the catch-all case. Your number is not a multiple of 5. Now let's compile it. And you see, no errors. This is good. Because no matter what happens, result will always get set equal to something. And that's what matters, as long as it gets set equal to something. So we're going to compile it. Oops, I deleted a space. And we're going to run it. So give me a number. 17. Your number is not a multiple of 5. Good. Let's run it again. 455. Your number is a multiple of 5. Alright, let's put it to the test. I'm going to give it a really big one. And let's end it with a 0. So because it ends in a 0, we know it should be a multiple of 5. Let's see if the computer knows that too. Ooh, was this number too big? I think that number's too big. Alright, let's try again. It's just a little smaller. Alright, well, that one was a 0. Alright, it's a multiple of 5. Yeah, you got to be careful with Java because it's very particular about how it distributes the memory out to the program. So if you tell it you want a double, that means it can only hold 64-bit number. And I think there's a way you can get around that, but let's not worry about that right now. I don't want to confuse you. Alright, so if you see that happen, try a smaller number. Alright, one last test case. Let's try a negative number. Negative 13. Well, that's not a multiple of 5. Good. Let's try one that is. And negative 15. Alright, cool. That's a multiple of 5. So that works. All well and good. Alright, let's do the next problem. I'm going to make a new file. We're going to do our docstring just like we always do. Oops. And this one is going to look pretty familiar. Write a program that determines if a given number is a multiple of 3. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to set the author. We're going to set the date. I don't know why I put spaces. There we go. And we're going to set the file. And, let's be consistent. So this one's going to be called multiple of 3.java. And let's save it. And what's the class mantra? Well, the class mantra is copy, paste, modify. Why would we rewrite all this perfectly good code if we've already done it? So let's copy it into here. There we go. Just make sure that this class name matches the file. There we go. Let's make sure we didn't break anything. We're going to compile it. We're going to run it. Give me a number. It's not a multiple of 5. Cool. So it all still works. We didn't break it when we copied it over. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to replace all the 5s with 3s. 3. 3. 3. 3. Save it. Compile it. Run it. 5. 5 is not a multiple of 3. Good. 9. 9 is a multiple of 3. Alright, so it was just that easy. Alright, that's 2 problems down. And there's another one like this on the assignment for you guys, so just a little wink wink nudge nudge. You can probably just copy this and do a little modification. And let's do one more problem. So docstring. This one also looks quite similar to one on the assignment. Here's the question. Write a program that takes 3 numbers as input and returns the smallest number. Once again, we're going to assume that we're talking about integer values here. You don't have to, but for the sake of just brevity, let's do, and simplicity, let's just say that these are integers. You could do the exact same thing with doubles if you wanted. Now I should probably really copy paste this, but let's see, the smallest number, just call it smallest. Class smallest. And I am going to go over here and copy and paste some stuff. Actually, I'm going to copy paste everything, because this is really going to be, all of our programs are pretty similar. Alright, so we've got our scanner, we've got our class, we've got the main method, we make the scanner, we got a prompt. This time the prompt's going to be, give me your first number. We're going to call it num1. Let's see, we want 3 numbers. So let's replace this comment, get numbers from the user. Control C, Control V, Control V. Let's fix the formatting a little bit. You want everything to be lined up nice, that way you can tell where the blocks are. And we got an extra space, so let's get rid of that. There we go. This one's going to be num2, and we're going to call this one num3. Makes sense. 1, 2, 3. This is going to be the second number, and this is going to be the third number. So we don't want this anymore. Alright, so what we can do is we can think about what exactly this means. So how are we going to figure out which of these numbers is the smallest? And we're going to assume that if they're equal, then you can just return one of the small values. So if you had the numbers 1, 1, and 2, then you could return the number 1, and that would suffice for solving this problem. So what if we make a variable called smallest? We don't know what that is yet, but we will. Okay? And we're going to say if num1 is less than num2, smallest equals num1. Else, so if number 1 isn't smaller than num2, that means that it must either be equal to it or greater than it. So in that case, smallest will be num2. Right? Agreed? So last but not least, we can do the exact same thing. So let's say find the smallest between numbers 1 and 2. Declare the variable smallest. Output the result to the user. Let's go ahead and write this real quick. System.out.println smallest is, don't forget your space, proper concatenation, is the smallest value. All right, semicolon. So we can do the exact same thing again. Find the smallest value between smallest and number 3. So if number 1 was smaller than number 2, and number 3 is smaller than number 1, or number 2, then we know number 1 is the smallest. Hold on. Alright, we'll see this in a second after I write it down. So if smallest is less than num3, let's say if num3 is less than smallest. That's a little bit, that'll be easier to see. Doesn't matter, you could do either, as long as you make sure the else is the opposite. Well, if num3 is smaller than the smallest, well then num3 is the smallest, right? Smallest equals num3. Make sure you get this in the right direction. What I was doing before would have reset number 3 to being whatever smallest was. This is going to reset the smallest value to be num3. And then this one would just be nothing, so smallest is unaffected. Right, because if num3 is bigger than smallest, or if it's even equal to smallest, then we don't need to change that value. So let's run it and see if it works, and then after that, semicolon, then after that I'll walk through exactly what's going on. No compilation errors. Let's give it a run. First number, 1, 2, 3. 1 is the smallest value. Let's run it again. And you want to make sure that you test this and try different sizes of numbers, put the smallest number in different places. So now the smallest number is the second one, and 4 is the smallest value. So that still works. Let's put the smallest value in the third spot. 5, 6, 3. And let's test it with a negative. Let's test it with a couple of negatives. So -2, -5, and 0. So -5 should be the smallest. Okay, so this works. So what's going on here? So we say, hey, I got this thing called the smallest. I'll tell you what it is in just a second. We come down here, and we just look at the first two numbers. And we determine which of those is the smallest. So if number 1 is smaller, we call it something called smallest. If number 2 is the smallest, then it goes in that bucket, smallest. So now that we have found the smallest between those two, we can compare that to that third number. If that third number is smaller than the smallest one between 1 and 2, well then it must be the smallest one entirely. Right? That makes sense? And if number 3 is bigger than the smallest, well then it can't possibly be the smallest one. So we can break the problem down to these two steps. And you could do the same thing if you had 4 or 5 numbers. If you had 4 numbers, what you would do is compare the first two, find the smallest one, compare the second two, find the smallest one, and then compare the two smallest ones to find the absolute smallest one. And if you wanted to find the biggest one, you can do the same thing. So hopefully that makes sense. Alright, and that's it for conditional statements. Like I said, there's some more interesting examples in the assignment, and when they get more interesting, sometimes they get a little bit harder, a little hard to dissect. So if there's any questions on those, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you and walk through those. Alright, see you in the next video.